Hey, my name is Tuomas Pahlman. Really glad to be hosting this webinar today. And a lot of you have been already introducing yourself in the chat. And we do have a large audience we were first aiming this mainly for the startups, but we do have a lot of accelerator participants and investors as well here. So gladly getting to know you better on what is the main challenges that you have in fundraising process. So starting with this question, a lot of answers already in the chat. We see there is how to attract investors, how to pitch to them, how to know when a project is actually fundable, and the whole share of the whole fundraising process. So it's a large scope project overall. So happy to be tackling these type of questions and answering these today and throughout the whole webinar series. So what we're starting to run out now is a series of Startup Fundraising Essentials. And we have been already talking about this topic in different workshops, in different webinars many times, but because of the feedback, we wanted to run a full series of webinars. And today, we're going to talk about an overview of what makes a startup fundable, what is the fundraising process. And then on the upcoming weeks, starting from next Thursday, we're going to deep dive more into specifying the round, how much you should be raising, what's the differences between pre-seed and seed round, what's the instruments and so forth. Then on April 4th, we're going to be discussing about the preparation for the round. So what type of materials you need, what do you need to do before contacting the investors, how to build your investor list, and so forth. Then on April 11th, we're going to discuss about how to run the race. So when you have been preparing all of your materials, how to contact the investors, what to present to them in different meetings and so forth, and how to negotiate with them. And finally, on the April 18th, we're going to discuss what to do after you have been raising your round. So kicking off a full series of webinars, make sure that you go to our website and sign up for the full series so you will get notified about this. And then maybe a couple of other words. We have been running this already or this first session some or a few times before. So if you have been participating in our previous sessions or some of my workshops, there might be a lot of repetitive on this first session. And but go there to sign up for the whole series, and then we can start to deep dive on later on onto these topics. Good. Okay, that's it out loud. Maybe a couple of housekeeping things. So the webinar is going to be recorded, and we will share you the recording afterwards. And also we have now already almost 100 people in here. So please use the chat all the time, ask questions there, and we'll try to address the questions throughout the chat. And what else? Well, I think that's mainly it. So let's head into today's agenda. So what we're discussing today is an overview of the fundraising process. So wanting to lay out you a general understanding of what are the key phases of the fundraising process, and then to start to think about more about how we see funds works, what actually is the kind of logics behind investors, what are they looking in a startup, and especially discuss about what makes a fundable startup. And then head into the Q&A at the end of the call. And we're roughly trying to do this in 45 minutes of talking and then 15 minutes of Q&A. But if any one of you know me, I'm really bad at timing, so it might go a little bit off or on, don't know. I haven't been practicing exactly the timing for this session, but trying to keep that in this 45 minutes. And during the whole session, feel free to ask any questions on the chat, and we might take them already during the presentation, or if we think that they come or we answer them on later parts, we'll just then take them later on the presentation. So feel free to be active on the chat as well. Good. But let's get kicking off. So maybe brief background. So for those that don't know me or the company before, so what we are doing, myself first, so used to be a founder. I guess I'm again a founder, did a couple of startups myself, deep tech stuff, exited them in 2015 and 2016, so already almost 10 years ago. Then since then, I have been an angel investor, investing directly to startups, but also helping a lot of the startups in growing and getting from the early stage into practical companies, and also helping them to fundraise a lot. Nowadays, I do more VC investments and investing through the funds, but still I do some occasional direct investments. And yeah, back into an entrepreneurial mode with hopohopo.io and the tools that we're building. But that's about me. So maybe a couple of words first on what is the company and what we are doing and how do we base this whole content that we are sharing with you. So we started to do tools for investors to help them source and screen deal flow. So especially for the early stage accelerators, angel networks, angels, and pre-seed VCs were our target audience for using our tools. But the whole point of this was not that we want to do a deal flow system for investors, but more that we wanted to build a tools how investors, advisors, and startups collaborate. Why collaborate? Well, the whole thing that we are basing and the vision where we are going with the company is around this startup investing, around collaboration between multiple stakeholders. What we mean by this is that there's always two sides, at least two people involved in startup investing. So there is at least one founder, owner of the company, and there is one investor investing into the startup. And it's good to separate that the startup is actually different than the founders or the owners of the startup. So typically this is at least two parties involved and the startup itself, but very often there's multiple other people around it. So there can be multiple founders, there can be multiple investors, and there's typically a lot of advisors around the investors, the startups. So lawyers, consultants, accelerator people, or business angels, business angel networks, or events. So a lot of people trying to help founders and investors find each other and making that connection happen. So that's why we're building the tool stack around the collaboration between these parties. And taking it from there, I'll skip that one. So today, what we're going to focus is really about this startup investing and how startup founders can actually convince the investors to invest into startups. And the metaphor we are going to use throughout the whole webinar series is actually a sales process. Why we use this is that if you think about startup fundraising, ultimately it's a sales process. So you founders who are there, classic. So computer is playing with me, but okay, I presume it's visible again. So startup fundraising is ultimately a sales process. So you founders, you are trying to sell your shares in return of investments to the company or convertible notes, whatever is the instruments, but you're in a sales process. And on the other side, the investors, they are in a buying process. And this means that we can use the basic metaphor of a sales process to describe what is the fundraising process. And starting with a funnel way of trying to describe the whole journey, what you need to do in the fundraising, it's similar than in a typical sales process. So what you're building first is you have a long list of prospects, potential investors that you could be reaching out. Then you're evaluating whom of actually they can be fit. You start to contact them, you try to get their attention, try to get to speak to them, start to discuss that do you actually fit to their criteria. then you go into negotiations with the investors, and eventually, hopefully, you will get term sheet signed and the money will be wired into your bank. So in principle, you can think about this very similar than to a typical sales process. And around in all sales processes, and what we want to discuss today is that what's actually the investors interested. So first of all, if we think about this, you want to get a deal signed. What you need to know is actually know your customer. So knowing what they are wanting to, or what they are buying from you. So knowing your investor is as important than knowing your customer. So maybe taking a couple of high-level things, first of all, on this kind of sales funnel, and what will apply here compared to traditional business-to-business sales law is that, first of all, you're looking most likely high deal size, so at least 10K tickets, and the tickets that you might be looking might be up to millions or multiple millions. So the deal size is high, and throughout the webinar series we're going to discuss about high deal sizes. So there might be the option of going to crowdfunding and just raising $100 tickets, but we're mainly focusing on this more traditional of high ticket size investing. And that said, when the ticket size is high, that traditionally means that the buying process is very long. So you're not going to get this done overnight. And naturally, at the same time, it means that the investors, so the buyers, are doing a lot of due diligence. They're evaluating you for a long time. They're not easily throwing the money at you. So the bigger the deal size, the longer the process typically takes. That naturally means that it requires a lot of effort to run and close the deal. So it will not happen easily and automatically. And the other thing that it's good to understand from the dynamics of this is that there's a low volume of buyers compared to the sellers. So there's a lot of startups out there trying to convince the investors to invest into them. And at the same time, the investors don't need to invest into startups, but there's a lot of other things that they can invest their money to. So the thing that you need to be able as founder to do is to cut through the noise, to catch even the investors' attention so that they're considering you as an investment case, because they do have a lot of options otherwise to consider at. And said this out loud, on the bottom, the outstanding deal, it's a must-have. So meaning that there is a lot of competition out there for the investors' money. So the outstanding deal is something that is just a must-have. If you don't have it, you will be screened out at some point of the process. So making sure that you're actually a fundable startup, that's very important before even starting this whole journey of contacting investors and reaching out to them. Because at the end, if you start this whole process of fundraising and you know that the investors are not going to invest at you in the end, well, why to start it? So for this reason, we wanted to start this session about discussing what makes startups fundable. So what are the elements that investors are looking at the end, so that you don't start fundraising without being sure that you're in a fundraise, or you can fundraise at the end, and that the investors can buy your product. And then jumping into this question of what do investors look at startups? Not to mean that how do you pitch to them or how you get their attention, but how do they actually evaluate startups? And first of all, it's good to understand that investors, what they are looking at you is profit. So merely there's a lot of things around there saying that you need to have a good story or you are solving a problem, but eventually what the investors wants to know is that they are there for seeking for profit. So especially VC funds, but also the angel investors, others, they are investing money to you so that they can get more money later on to their if they're individuals, to themselves, or they might be investing other people's money, and they have been committing to get more money back to there. So this is the pure essence that you need to have in your startup to be able to provide the investors more money later on that they are getting from your zero, they're buying from you at the moment. So this said out loud, how much profit? And this was one of the first things that I was challenged by when I was a startupper, is that I was thinking that isn't, for example, 5 times the pre-money valuation of my company, if I raise at, let's say 2 million, isn't a 10 million exit good for the investors? And the investors, they're saying that you need to get 10x or even 50 to 100x back for the investors from a startup. And this was very confusing to me when I was fundraising. And it's really important to understand why they seek this amount of returns. And if we go into this more in, or what I want to next break down to you, is why the investors are seeking so high returns on investments. And I think the current number from VCs that is or what they're looking is between 50 to 100x the pre-seed seed valuations. And what this is typically showing to investors is that you might have a really good business case, but it might not equal a good investment. So it's about this, how good it's for you as founders, the business case, making if you own 30% out of a 10 million exit, it might be very lucrative for you personally, but it might not be very good for the investors itself. And why this way? Well, next, what I want to understand or make you understand is the kind of other options investors have, and comparing you to the competition, because you are selling your shares to the investor, and the investor has other options to buy in. So you might have direct competition, but first of all, you will have a lot of competition otherwise. So what I mean by this is that the investors, they have a lot of other options than investing into startups. So it's good to understand the kind of indirect competition for the investors' money. So what we typically see is that the investors have multiple options of evaluating different asset classes. And the typical way to evaluate it is between the risk and reward. So like me as a business angel or pension funds, they have a lot of different ways to put in or put their money. So I can just put the money into my bank account and get an interest, or I can put it to lending, I can go to stocks, I can go to private equity, I can go even to VC funds, or I can go to the startups directly. And now I think the traditional comparison between startups and other asset classes, well, let's take, for example, the stocks. And we know by history that the stocks are yielding 8% throughout the year, year by year, return for the investors. But the difference between startups and stocks is that I can go into Nordnet and buy basically whatever stock I want throughout the world today, and I can sell them tomorrow. So I can just go and buy NVIDIA shares today and sell them tomorrow, or I can buy Nokia shares, whatever company shares, and get the returns or get my money back when I want. So the asset class is very liquid, and this way that's much less risky compared to startups. So if I invest in the startups today, I know that I will not get my money back tomorrow. Most likely it will take 10 years at least that I will see the money back coming back from the startups. So if I put something in, I cannot use that money. And of course, for an investor, that has value. And the other thing of this is that if I invest into a, let's say, a telecom company or NVIDIA or something who's already in a business, the likelihood of them going bust versus startups going bust, it's very much less risky to invest into stocks. So if the stocks are yielding 8% throughout the year, year by year, if I would invest into startups, I would want naturally to get much higher return for the risk that we're taking. And the typical thing that VC funds expects to return to their investors is around 20% IRR. And so if stocks are yielding 8%, the VCs are promising 20% investment to this investors of the VC fund. And so this is the first competition that you're challenged as a startup of convincing the investors. But then this 20% IRR, it's still not 50 to 100x. It's, let's say in 10 years, it's something like 3 or 4x what they're getting at this. So where does this 50 to 100x comes then? Well, let's go into how VC funds work. And let's take that you have a fund size of 100 million. What that means is that 100 million, the VCs are collecting it from pension funds, from corporations, for high net individuals, and they are basically pulling up other people's money into a fund. And it's good to note that the VC funds, they are companies itself. So they have salaried staff, they have analysts, they have the partners, they have cost themselves. So out of that 100 million, if they invested throughout 10 years, only 80 million will go to startups directly, and already 20 million is around costs. And out of this 80 million, what they invest, roughly 1/3 of the startups that they invest will fail. So they will not return anything back to the fund. So already kind of half of the invested money is almost going to or returning nothing. Then another 1/3 roughly returns itself back. And what the VC basically needs is the rest 1/3 returning, making the whole fund profitable. And if they get a 10x return out of 1/3 of their companies, that would equal roughly a 300 million return, making 200 million profit. So if the investors are investing into 100 million originally, they are getting a profit on 10 years, roughly 200 million, so 3x, and that would equal into 20% IRR. And the main thing, the difference between this 5x returns and 10x returns is that if the best performing companies in the VC funds returns only 5x, the fund will return, it will be still positive, but it will be only an 8% IRR. So the same that the investors would get from the stocks. And this is the kind of main reason why you need to be able to provide a lot of money back to the investors. So 5x to you might be really good, but it's not good for the VCs to justify the risk that they take. So your basically exit needs to be able to justify a lot of other costs than the overall 20% what they are eventually trying to get back to the investors. So the investing game is a lot about statistics and diversification and portfolio in this sense. But good. So that's basically how the fund works and the fund mathematics. And naturally, this means that, well, you need to be able to justify high pre-seed seed valuations. So one more point out of this is that if you're bringing 10x overall the fund, the money back for the fund, but it might be, or it will be, that the investors are investing in multiple rounds to your startups, and so in the pre-seed, seed, A round, and so forth. So the first round valuation, you need to be in 50 to 100x, and that naturally leads into a question that can you build at least a $500 million valuation in around 10 years? And that's what the investors are expecting from you, that can you be big enough that it's meaningful for them? Of course, if you're kind of looking from smaller funds or smaller or from angels, the valuations can be lower, but you can just scale this framework around the investors that you're looking at. So that's kind of the core essence, how the funds are evaluating startups. So you need to be able to provide them enough money back. And if you're not, then kind of your story or your pitch or whatever assets you might have there, they don't matter if at the end you cannot convince them that you're able to build enough money back to them. But if you're able to convince them about this, then they start to go more into the details of how they evaluate that. Are you actually getting to that valuation? And for that, well, next, let's jump into the topic of how investors evaluate startups. And for this, well, maybe I'll ask it first in the chat. Just let me know that what's the things that you're hearing that the investors are evaluating. So feel free to answer in the chat things that the investors typically evaluate in the startups. Team and people, team and business model, and market potential, natural scalability, team and tracks and growth potential, unit economics, problem and solution, definitely timing, potential market size, customer needs, good ones. So a lot of good answers. And this was actually one of the things when I became a angel myself. So going from being an operator and a startup founder into a investing, I was actually very puzzled that there's just so many things that I should be evaluating in a startup. How can I evaluate these startups in a rational frame? And what I wanted to do is, I had my gut feeling of how to evaluate a good startup and what I thought is good in startup teams. But what I wanted to start to do is actually evaluate how other investors are seeing it. And what we did for this is we analyzed more than 2,000 startup deals by investors, angels, and accelerators, and started to analyze the reasons why they are saying no to these startups. And what we wanted to look at here is that can we decipher kind of a framework around what makes a startup fundable? And the other thing out of this is the more kind of analyzing startups, seeing myself startups, the more it started to repeat itself. So like we see now in the chat, it's very repetitive things that you're saying that is important for the investors. But let's dive deeper into what we found it out of this analysis. So the components that we found it out. So on these memos, the reasons that we were just seeing that the investors are saying no to the startups. So first, there was clearly that is the startup solving a problem? And why this is important is purely because there's this discussion of a problem solution fit. But how do you evaluate a solution? By definition, it solves something. It solves a problem. And how do you evaluate a solution? Is it a good solution? Does it need a new feature? Does it need to be 10 times better if you don't know what it's solving? So it's kind of, is a phone good, or how do you compare this? You need to have a kind of way of comparing things. And the investors, they have hard time to evaluate solutions if they don't have a way to evaluate it. So like myself, we were doing optical sensors, and it was very hard to compare us that, okay, are they good optical sensors? Well, completely thinking, I would say that for 99% of the applications of optical sensors in the world, or 99.9, they were really crappy. But for a couple of applications in the world, they were the best in the world. And that was the problem that we were trying to solve. And the investors could look actually that the problem, does our solution fit to the problem, and then to evaluate it. So the problem and solution pair was naturally the thing that needs to be there. But in addition to this, then there's the framework of product market fit. So how do you go from the problem solution fit to product market fit? And well, first of all, it's good to understand that the market is really important consideration of this piece, as well the competition, and all of these things needs to be in fit. So if you're having a problem, then the investors are looking that is the problem, how big market the problem has. So is it a local problem or is it a global problem? So let's take Finland, for example. We very often see that startups are finding a problem in Finland, but is it, and then they're thinking that, okay, it's a global problem, it's a really big problem. It might not be. But let's take the competition, for example. Like you're most likely you wouldn't be going next to a small market, and Finland is really small market in the global side. So the competition, the newest innovation doesn't come to Finland the fastest. And this way, very often, or let's take something industrial, you might have a problem in a factory in Finland, but if there's one factory of, let's take, there's one factory of making car tires in Finland. If they have a problem, it doesn't mean that the car tire factory in Poland or in Brazil has the same problems. So this evaluating, is the problem same around the market that you're going? Is it the same? That's one of the important parts. But then naturally also the competition side, that you might be competitive locally, but can you be competitive in other regions? Or if the competitors has been taking parts of the market already, you cannot enter to the same way or be competitive in different markets depending on your resourcing. And I'm always using a very stupid example of this whole fits is kind of the product market fit example is that I can be actually competitive selling ice cream in my street. So what I mean by that is that if I narrow the market very small, I can be competitive. And I might be competitive selling ice cream to the next street still. But if I increase the market size into a 1 kilometer radius, we start to have grocery stores, kiosks, whatever selling ice cream, and I'm not any more competitive. And this way, this kind of components are very dynamic. Depends how do you choose them. You can be having a product market fit or not. And of course, these are the kind of cores that the investors evaluate. And then on top of this, you start to have these other items. So like the business model. So the business model is important, but selling ice cream to my street versus selling ice cream globally, very different business models. But if you don't define the core elements, then the business model really doesn't make sense. And deciding a business model before deciding the cores, they just need to fit together. The same goes to go to market. Again, selling ice cream in my street. No need to do inbound marketing. No need to do heavy sales calls or lead validation. I just walk through the, knock through the doors or put up a sign on the street. So very different than going global. And then what the investors evaluate always is that are all of these scalable? So you have an example of something that you have been validating. Can this be scalable into the future directions where you want to go? And naturally out of this, the final thing that they're looking at is the financials and funding plan. So what this means is that I could have a really great business plan around selling ice cream in my street, but it's not worth pouring 5 million into it. So it's just not scalable, and there's no reason to put enough money into that, although in small scale it seems reasonable. So what are you building inside? The investors are just looking that, does that make sense comparing all the other options they have possibilities to invest at? And finally, naturally, the thing that everybody's talking about is the team. The team is the one that needs to be able to execute all of this. So what they're taking a look at is how the team able to build this so that the investor is actually being sure that they will get their money back at the end. And if we start to take a couple of extra things around here, that what we see from statistics out of what can save you in here, what you can get wrong. So this is naturally a thing that you need to search for the problem solution and kind of explore how do you get the core right. But what we see very often is that if you haven't been defining a problem, or the problem solution fit doesn't make sense, the solution doesn't seem competitive compared to the competition, nothing in the go-to-market or your financials or in the business model, they will not save you if you have something wrong in the core. And this is very clear from the kind of why the pitch deck is built in the way that starts with the problem, explain the solution, and then go to the market and competition. So there's a reason for that. And it's just simply that those are the things that will make it easy for the investor to evaluate your case. Does it make sense? Is it plausible? And if you fail on those, it's very hard to convince the investors around it. There is a couple of exceptions. First of all, well, if your team, meaning that you're Miki Kuusi or Ilkka Paananen, the investors know already that you know this, so you don't need to explain then how you're going to do it. They just know that you can do this. But if you don't have that previous track record in building this, then you need to be able to convince the investors around it. And if you're not able to clearly articulate what's the problem solution, why you're competitive in this certain market, it's hard for them, the investors, to kind of, why would they invest into you? And naturally, maybe the other thing that is maybe making chances that if you're not able to explain it, but you still have, for some reason, a lot of sales, a lot of traction, then they might be investing into you. But very, very unlikely that that will happen. So these are kind of what we deciphered from the studies that we did. And then maybe taking a look at a couple of other things, how to weigh the different components in different stages. So if you think about this first thing, so if you're pre-seed, you have nothing yet. Maybe you have a little bit of a wait list or something, but it's mainly about the founder and how well you're able to formulate the story. Are you able to convince the investors? And the more important the story is, naturally the market is somewhat important, but most likely the market will change and timing of that story. But the further you go, the further you start to have something tangible to evaluate. And on the seed stage, you have been already investing into your product, so you start to have a little bit of traction there. It's also very much harder in the seeds to start pivoting. So you have been building maybe 6 months, putting a couple of $100K into a product. It's not anymore that easy to change everything there, while it's very easy to change stuff when they are only on paper. So it starts to be more about the kind of market and what you have been able to do, still a lot about the team. And then when it goes to Series A, seed plus Series A, it's about the traction. It starts to be around the numbers, and naturally, does the numbers scale to the market that you're targeting? So you might be effective, or the thing might be looking good in terms of numbers in Finland, but can you continue scaling to other markets? So is there basically enough market still to take with the same method? And so is it worth pouring more money into the same thing? And the other thing that the investors are looking, there's called the founder market fit. But the more what we want to show, I think there's not yet dubbed or coined this term founder journey fit, but the investors are actually looking around this, that not only that the founder knows the market, but is the founder, especially from a pre-seed, is it able to take the company to at least Series A, or one of the founders? Why this is very important is that the investors basically, on the Series A, it starts to be the time that you can start to take traditional management methods of building a management team. You start to have proper company at that point. So it makes sense to start kind of changing the team at that point. You can start to hire new managing directors or so forth. But on the early stage, if you need to change the team, especially the whole team, it's most likely not worth it. So the time that you are actually trying to find a new managing director, it's kind of finding a new founder almost at that point. And if the investors are not convinced that you can take it big enough, then it's hard for them to think about that. Just would they want to go into that looking for the new management there, and changing management when you are kind of in a exploration mode, it's really hard to find out people to jump into those ones. So it's very important that you can convince that you can build a business out of it that you can hand over at a point. So the founder journey fit is as important as the founder market fit. Okey-doke. Hey, we start to be 45 minutes in. This was the main topics I wanted to share today. And then on the upcoming sessions, we're going to go more into the other steps of the fundraising funnel. And naturally, next week, we're going to discuss around how to set up or how to prepare, how to specify your round. So thinking of this problem solution fit. So how do you actually make a plan around this? That should you be raising $500,000 or 100K and so forth. But those are the upcoming webinars, and I'll skip a couple of slides. So I have my old presentation here. This is something that we go through later. Okay, my bad. This was the next slide I wanted to show to you. Okay, so we have roughly 13 minutes more time for Q&A. So if you have any questions at the moment, feel free to put them in the chat. And meanwhile, there's new questions popping up. I will take a couple of previous ones. And Donaldo going to tokenizing NFT shares. First of all, I have no idea of NFTs and tokenizing, so I'm the worst people to answer on those questions. So I will not take that question. Sorry for that. Then, how do you advise people to develop and present an exit plan? That's a good topic that we're discussing a little more next week. But I think the exit plan, this framework that we just discussed around this, what you're actually building, the exit plan is an outcome of that. So if you build what you're building, will there be somebody buying it? And that's a natural thing that you need to be able to make clear that if you build that stuff, the end outcome will be something that someone will buy. And I think that's something very important, that how realistical that, or can you build something that somebody will be buying? So then it's easy for the investors to evaluate actually that this exit plan is rational. So what I mean by this is, I have actually the saying that I'm a sales guy by heart, and I've been always saying that sales is super easy. Selling is very, very, very easy. So what I mean by this is that you just need to promise what the customer wants. But then comes the question that, can you deliver it? So making an exit plan on paper is really easy, or in a slide. Hey, we are going to build this, and then Amazon is going to buy us for $5 billion. Yeah, is it going to happen? And if you're going to sell something like $100 product, yeah, you don't need to have a convincing plan because the people can just throw the money in. If you're making a plan for exiting 5 billion, you need to have a very good plan around it, and the investors needs to be very convinced that you can build it. So I think this is very more about making sure that the investors trust that you can build it. The exit will happen. There's a lot of ways. If you build something valuable, there's a lot of ways of making the money out of it. But it's really about that. Can you convince that you can build it? So Konstantin is asking, then you have an MVP and released in a couple of months. A project is bootstrapped and developed, and you're needing money for actions. Is it pre-seed or seed? A little bit depends on that one. Next week, we're going to discuss more around the differences between pre-seed and seed, and evaluating that requires somewhat more information. So we'll answer that question in the coming weeks. Then, how to handle angels VCs giving you a clear yes or no? Good one, Tuomas. I think this is again touching that discussion not next week but the week after, but giving you already a hint around this. One of the reasons why we're building the platform is actually helping us to find out and giving feedback to startups, but also helping us investors to reduce the noise in our deal flow. So what I mean by this is that if you don't get an answer, maybe the question is that, do you deserve the answer as well? And there's a lot of I think bad advice or kind of advice how to conduct investors, but they're taking out of the whole kind of context. So what I mean by this is that, for example, myself, I get a lot of questions that, hey, do you invest into this? Well, do I need to answer that if you contact me in LinkedIn and under that my profile is my investment thesis? So it's about that, what are you asking from them? And did you do your job of making sure of could you already kind of know is it a no or not? So kind of knowing your customer is important. But then again, it's also a sales process, and you are basically marketing to investors. You're trying to get a meeting with them, and like in all sales and marketing, the other side, they have no responsibility to answer all the prospects that they have. Of course, it's a good habit, but the sheer volume makes it impossible. And if you think about yourself of do you answer to all phone sales people really accurately why they are not interested? Do you answer all the calls? Do you answer all the emails you get? No, we don't. And it's similar to the buying process. So the first of all, you need to get their attention and get to the discussion before getting that no. So I think this is an important part, but we're going to dive deeper into that in 2 weeks. Then Talat is asking, is it accepted as good thing of the solution distracting current environment with traditional solution led by meta type of companies? If I get the essence of the questions, it's kind of, are you dreaming big, or are you going bottoms up or tops down? And if you're wanting to disrupt meta, of course, that's kind of all the investors know that, hey, if you're going to be the next meta, you're going to be really valuable. Are you going to be the next meta? So you have two things of, you're building something hugely valuable. Can you? Or then you can communicate that, hey, we're building this small stuff. And then on top of that, we'll build this one. And then we build this one. And eventually it's going to be a huge thing. But there's kind of no right or wrong on communicating this to the investors, but you need to have those both things. Eventually you have a plan. How do you build your as startup, and will that way that you build it, will it be big enough to justify the investment? Or that you can start by dreaming big, hey, we're going to be the next Meta, but then the investors are going to evaluate, can you be the next Meta? But you need to succeed on both. Nico is then asking how to evaluate a problem if it's actually more a new possibility rather than existing problem. I think this is yeah, for example, I don't think there is a need for social platform before one existed. I think that's a good question, and I do disagree with that eventual comment that was there a need for a social platform before Facebook? Yes, there was. So, but you need to go into a atoms of what Facebook did. Would I want, so before that, I wasn't connected to a lot of my colleagues. I could basically text or call, but I needed to do the action, but I couldn't get any kind of bigger understanding from what's happening in with friends that I cannot keep up with. So I do think they solved a lot of Facebook solved a lot of problems. Of course, it's kind of framed in a opportunity, but it's a lot of small problems, and people wanting to be connected, and the kind of value of being connected was their important thing. But I think this is very often this opportunity versus a real problem. Then again, if you take this framework away from business to business, consumer products are more opportunities, and it's hard to say, why did I buy the red thing over the blue thing? So it's more opportunity based. So I think it could, where it starts to be hazy is between consumers and or kind of low-cost consumer products, where the problem is more a kind of psychological thinking, and are they problems itself? But still, that if you are an Apple guy, why do you buy from Apple? And it might be solving your problem of wanting to sell yourself in a way. Typically, it's not called in the sentiment a problem, but it's still kind of the same meta or semantics behind it. Okay, we have 3 minutes left of this session, and I'll take one more, and then I just need to show you a couple of extra things on the slides. So Timo, I'll take that one. Any rule of thumb of allocating limited team resources between fundraising and building your product and business? Good one. So I think this is the pain in the ass. What we try to help you, what we're building actually is making your fundraise, making you spend less time on fundraising so that you don't need to set it up, you don't need to learn these things that well, that we try to help you around that. So if you think about from a business perspective, you should be first of all focusing on the business. If you're doing great in business, the fundraising will be much easier. But then naturally, if you're building something new, so let's say you're purchasing a house, you just need to think about how you're going to get that house. And this kind of balance between those, I don't say there is a kind of right or wrong answer into this. There's, if you have a 3-person team, they're saying that one person should be solely fundraising. But I think this, if you're solely fundraising, I would say that's solely building this whole metaphor of what's a growing business. Because eventually when you take this concept of what the investor are looking, they're not looking for a investable business only, but they're looking that, will this business be profitable? Will this be worth more later on? So if you build a very good plan, it works for your company. That's what you need to execute. It's your business. And then kind of nailing the whole fundraising story on top of that. That's what we try to achieve, to combine these both things. So you wouldn't be spending that much on fundraising alone. But if you follow the process we're showing you, then the kind of fundraising part is very little added to it. But yes, overall, it takes a lot of time. Then is it business or fundraising? That's a question mark. Hey, time is running out. We know we have a lot of good questions. Sorry for not being able to answer all of them. But next things coming, go to our website, make sure that you sign up for the upcoming sessions. We're going to send you a recording after this one, and also on the next sessions. But yeah, next Thursday, specifying your round. Go to that. Couple of other things, just rushing through. What's coming up? Another thing, so we know we have a lot of early stage startups, might not be yet fundraisable. So what we're building next is, today we have one of the biggest investor networks in our platform in Europe. Next, what we're building is also an accelerator program network. So listing out Europe's accelerator programs, many of them invest into and are good solutions for early stage companies. So feel free to go to our website and sign up for this waitlist. And also what we need is, we know, of course, the kind of big ones, but there's a lot of local ones, good ones. So feel free to refer them to us if you know local incubators, accelerators who are doing good work for that. And another thing, what else? Yep. If you like the content, feel free to spread out the word in LinkedIn, follow our company account, all praising, we love you as well. So happy for getting all the feedback. Well, sharing is social, but also all the feedback that you can give to us from the webinars or from our product. Feel free to give it back to us. Anyway, hey, once I was on time, doesn't happen often, 1 minute late. Thank you all and have a really great Thursday.